Public expenditure is very important both in developed and developing countries. In Adam Smith's opinion, government expenditures are made to supply such goods and services that are advantageous to a society at large, but private sector hesitates to supply these goods due to profitability concerns. Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, viewed that the government expenditure should be restricted to defense against foreign aggression, law and order in view to maintenance of internal peace, and public development work, specifically where private sector is not ready to supply or supply is not as per the requirement. Economists explain that government has to provide a number of facilities providing large societal benefits, but the provision of these facilities require huge investment. The gestation period is also very large in such cases. We use the term public goods in the context of such goods which are provided by the government and the provision of which is not profitable for private enterprises, because efficiency requires that these goods should be provided at a zero price. This is so because public goods are non-rival and non-excludable in consumption. It is either not possible or feasible to facilitate exclusion in the consumption of public goods. In other words, due to feasibility reasons or cost concerns, one cannot limit the consumption of public goods to those who pay a price for them. Also within limits, consumption of a public good by some members of a society does not reduce the amount of it available for others. The common examples of pure public goods are defense, lighthouses, flood control methods, public parks, etc. Besides providing goods and services, government expenditures are also incurred on collective goods, transfer payments, subsidies, tax provisions, etc. Further, public expenditure is influenced by various interest groups, among which political parties and policy makers are more important as compared to other interest groups such as labor unions, trade associations, chambers of commerce and industry, religion and occupational groups, military and bureaucracy, even the unaffiliated citizens. The importance of these groups varies at different stages of development of a society, from a traditional to a modern one. Besides these interest groups, expenditures are also affected by economic structure of the country as well as by sociological, geographic, demographic and technological factors. Naqsheh has emphasized that international demonstration effect also affects the government expenditures of the poorer nations. In this module, we will discuss the views of two great scholars on the importance of increasing state activities in an economy. First is the law of increasing state activity by Adolf Wagner, and the second is the Peacock-Wiseman Hypothesis by Alan T. Peacock and Jack Wiseman.
After studying this module, you shall be able to know the Wagner's law of increasing state activity and Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis, identify various factors affecting the public expenditure, evaluate the empirical validity of the two hypotheses. The importance of public expenditure is very important both in developed and developing countries. According to Adam Smith, government expenditures are made to supply such goods and services that are advantageous to a great society, but private sector would not supply those due to profitability concerns. Economists explain that government has to provide a number of facilities providing large societal benefits, but the provision of these facilities requires huge investment. Further, expenditures of government are influenced by various interest groups, among which political parties and policy makers are more important as compared to other interest groups. In this context, There are two scholars who have provided views on role and importance of increasing state activities in an economy. First, the law of increasing state activity by Adolf Wagner, and second, the Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis by Alan T. Peacock and Jack Wiseman.
Before explaining the laws, it is important to understand that these two theories are concerned only with the resource using public expenditure, which is distinct from transfer payments. Distinction is caused mainly by the reasons of growth of two types of public expenditure. Resource using public expenditure is related to public expenditure on goods and services and on domestic fixed capital formation, whereas transfer payments might grow due to quite different reasons. Further, these two hypotheses are classified as macro models of growth of resource using public expenditure as distinct from micro models of public expenditure growth. Macro models analyze the long-term growth of public expenditure, whereas micro models analyze the changes in particular components of public expenditure. In 1883, Adolf Wagner, the German economist, made an in-depth study relating to the rise in government expenditure in the late 19th century. He propounded a law called the law of increasing state activity. The law states that as the economy develops over time, the activities and functions of the government increase. Adolf Wagner says comprehensive comparison of different countries and different times show that among progressive peoples, that is societies, with which alone we are concerned, an increase regularly takes place in the activity of both the central government and the local governments. Constantly undertake new functions while they perform both old and new functions more efficiently and more completely. In this way, economic needs of the people to an increasing extent and in a more satisfactory fashion are satisfied by the central and local governments.
Let us first discuss the Wagner's law of increasing state activity. According to him, economic development of a nation leads to an increase in the activities and functions of the government. He explains that in progressive societies, governments at central and local levels constantly undertake new functions while they also perform old functions, and this leads to a regular increase in the activity of the government. The aim of government activities is to satisfy economic needs of the people more efficiently and more completely so that there is an increase, extensive as well as intensive, in such activities and hence public expenditure. Thus, the state performs three functions: providing administration and protection, ensuring stability, and ensuring social and economic welfare of society.
Wagner was of the opinion that economic development of a nation leads to an increase in the activities and function of the government. He explains that in progressive societies, governments at central and local levels constantly undertake new functions while they also perform old functions, and this leads to a regular increase in the activity of the government. The aim of the government activities is to satisfy economic needs of the people more efficiently and more completely so that there is an increase extensive as well as intensive in such activities and hence public expenditure. Therefore, public sectors in industrializing nations grow as proportion of total economic activity with the increase in per capita income and output. Although Wagner has based his study on industrial nations, but according to him, the law is equally applicable in the case of developing countries. Wagner views that relationship between the state and its citizens is such that the state exists independently of the individuals in society, but it has a general responsibility for the economic and social welfare of the society as a whole. According to him, a state performs three functions: providing administration and protection, ensuring stability, and ensuring social and economic welfare of the society. According to Herber, 1979, the hypothesis explains that a fundamental cause and effect relationship exists between the growth of an industrialized economy and the relative growth of its public sector. The relative growth of the government sector is an inherent characteristic of the industrializing economies. He further explains the hypothesis as efforts to find a predictable, long-run functional relationship between certain causal variables and relative public sector growth.
Let us understand his concept with the help of diagram. This figure shows the relative expansion of public sector economic activity over an extended period of time. On the horizontal and vertical axis, real per capita income Y and real per capita output of public goods PG is measured respectively. PG1 represents a constant proportional increase in the real per capita output of public goods with the increase in real per capita income, whereas PG2 indicates that public sector grows at an increasing rate. In other words, proportional increase in public sector is not constant but increasing with the increase in total economic activity. Wagner's hypothesis is criticized in context of the relationship between the state and its citizens as viewed by him. This theory is criticized on three counts. The law is not applicable to all the Western nations. As the law analyzes long-term trends of public expenditure, it tends to ignore the process of growth of public expenditure. It does not analyze the effect of war on public expenditure.
Now we present some empirical evidence on the applicability of Wagner's law. Goudet, 1986, analyzes the growth of public expenditure for a period of 80 years as shown in the table. He calculates the ratio of total government expenditures of all levels of government to GNP or GDP in percent in case of 5 industrial countries at 2 points of time, 1890 and 1970. The rising trends of government expenditures as a proportion of national income confirm the validity of Wagner's law. The countries are given in the table are Canada, France, Germany, United Kingdom, United States. We can study the growth of public expenditure in various countries as provided by the World Bank. The table shows the general government final consumption expenditure as a percentage of the country's GDP for the period 1960 to 2012 for both developed and developing economies. It includes all current expenditures on goods and services, including compensation of employees, government, most expenditures on national defense and security, excluding government military expenditure that are part of the government capital formation. In Australia, the percentage of government expenditure increased from nearly 12% in 1960-70 to 17.5% in 2000-2012. In China, the percentage of the government expenditure increased from 7.5% in 1960, 70 to 14.2% in 2000-2012. This pattern of increasing government expenditure can be seen also in the developing countries. For example, in India, the government expenditure increased from 8.4% in 1960-70 to 11.4% in 2000-2012. Thus, we have observed that the general trend in most of the countries has been of increasing public expenditure.
Let's now discuss Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis. Alan T. Peacock and Jack Wiseman conducted a study of behavior of government expenditure in the UK for the period 1890 to 1955. The study analyzes the time pattern of public expenditure. It explains some important characteristics of growth of public sector. It is argued that growth in public expenditure involved spurts of growth followed by long static periods rather than a smooth and continuous growth pattern, that is, in a step-like pattern coinciding with social crises and wars. Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis is based on three types of effects through which public expenditure increases, that are displacement, inspection, and concentration effect.
Peacock and Wiseman explain the hypothesis with the help of three types of effects through which public expenditure increases: displacement, inspection, and concentration effects. Displacement effect is explained through comparing public expenditure in times of peace and in social disturbances, as they see the expenditure cannot be the same at two different times. They were of the view that government likes to increase its expenditure as it has to take care of society's welfare. Besides, some disturbances at times may also lead to increased government expenditure, which may not be met from existing public revenue. But the fact that citizens do not like to pay taxes puts a constraint on government spending. The government expenditure is constrained by what they call tolerable level of taxation, which remains quite stable during the times of peace. With the growth in national income, tax revenue would also grow at a constant tolerable tax rate. It enables the public expenditure to grow gradually. This gradual trend is disturbed by the social crises such as wars, famines, or other economic problems, during which higher taxes also become acceptable to the society as government needs higher public revenue to meet unanticipated expenditure. The relative expansion in government activities at the times of social disturbances displaces the previous level of expenditure, which they termed as displacement effect. And they also argued that this displaced public expenditure does not fall back to original level, that is, it remains displaced at this level even after the crisis is over. Peacock and Wiseman argued that increase in public expenditure does not tend to be smooth and continuous, rather it increases in jerks or step-like fashion. The inspection effect takes place when people observe and accept the greater social spending required to fulfill social needs during the crisis. It happens as society realizes that it carries new high tax burden. In other words, new levels of tax tolerance emerge. The concentration, that is the scale effect, is the tendency for central government economic activity to become an increasing proportion of the total public sector economic activity during times of economic growth of a society. We will study all these three effects one by one.
Displacement effect is explained through comparing public expenditure in times of peace and times of social disturbances, as they see that the expenditure cannot be same at these two times. They were of the view that the government expenditure is constrained by what they call tolerable level of taxation, which remains quite stable during the times of peace. With the growth in national income, tax revenue would also grow at a constant tolerable tax rate. It enables the public expenditure to grow gradually. Government likes to increase its expenditure as it has to take care of society's welfare. The relative expansion in government activity at the times of social disturbances displaces the previous level of government expenditure, which they termed as the displacement effect. The inspection effect takes place when people observe and accept the greater social spending required to fulfill social needs during the crisis. It happens as society realizes that it carries a new higher tax burden, in other words, new levels of tax tolerance emerge. The concentration scale effect is the tendency for central government economic activity to become an increasing proportion of the total public sector economic activity during times of economic growth of a society.
Peacock and Wiseman further stated that the rise in public expenditure greatly depends on revenue collection. Over the years, economic development results in substantial revenue to the government. This enabled to increase public expenditure. Moreover, there exists a gap between the expectations of the people about public expenditure and the tolerance level of taxation. Therefore, governments cannot ignore demands made by people regarding various services, especially when the revenue collection is increasing at constant rate of taxation. They further stated that during the times of war, government further increases the tax rates and enlarge the tax structure to generate more funds to meet the increase in defense expenditure. After the war, the new tax rates and tax structure may remain the same as people get used to them. Therefore, the increase in revenue results in rise in the government expenditure.
Understand Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis with the help of diagram. In figure the step-like pattern of growth of public sector revenue and expenditures in Great Britain during the period 1890 to 1955. Government fiscal activities rise step by step to successive new plateau, and the spurt of growth is followed by a long static period. The steps indicate the periods of major social disturbance. After every step, a new, higher tax and expenditure level displaces the old, lower levels.
Let us now recapitulate what we have learnt in this module. The role and importance of public expenditure is very important both in developed and developing countries. Government has to provide a number of facilities providing large societal benefits, but the provision of these facilities requires huge investment. The gestation period is also very high in such cases. These types of goods are generally known as public goods and are non-rival and non-excludable in consumption. Public expenditures are made to supply such goods and services that are advantageous to a society, but private sector would not supply these goods due to profitability concerns. The importance of public expenditure is rigorously explained by Adolf Wagner and Peacock and Wiseman in their theory of the law of increasing state activity and Peacock and Wiseman hypothesis respectively. The public expenditure is positively correlated with the development of the country. According to Wagner, a fundamental cause and effect relationship exists between the growth of an industrializing economy and the relative growth of its public sector. The relative growth of the government sector is an inherent characteristic of industrializing economy. The Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis analyzes the time pattern of public expenditure. It explains some important characteristics of growth of public sector. According to Peacock and Wiseman, the public expenditure does not increase in a smooth and continuous fashion. It involves spurts of growth followed by long static periods, that is, in a step-like pattern coinciding with society, crisis and wars. They explain the pattern of public expenditure based on three elements, that is the displacement effect, inspection effect and concentration effects. Thus, both Wagner's law and Peacock and Wiseman hypothesis emphasize on the fact that public expenditure has tendency to increase over time.
Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis recognized the importance of public expenditure during social crisis, but it has failed to explain the limit after which an economic problem can be qualified as a social crisis. In this module, you have learned about the role and importance of public expenditure in developed and developing countries. The importance of public expenditure is positively correlated with the development of country. To provide theoretical understanding, Adolf Wagner developed the law of increasing state activity, which discussed that a fundamental cause and effect relationship exists between the growth of an industrializing economy and the relative growth of its public sector, and Alan T. Peacock and Jack Wiseman developed the Peacock-Wiseman hypothesis, which analyzes the time pattern of public expenditure.